Hello, hello, and welcome to Journey to SEA 2025. Thank you for joining me live. This is Shellyan Edwards Barron, your creative writing specialist, here to talk things about reports, narratives, and comprehension. Yes, we're including comprehension in this series as well. So, just a little bit about me for those who are joining for the first time. I call myself a creative writing specialist because I look at writing from multiple perspectives. In fact, I use something called multisensory learning because I believe writing could be a little bit more interesting than we usually make it. And when I was a university lecturer, I taught at University of the Southern Caribbean for a number of years. I noticed that in my writing classes, I would always get a student who would say, Miss, you like writing, that's why you could do that. Um, and they inevitably gave me stories about what happened at the primary school level. I mean, yeah, these are university students in their 30s and older telling me about something that happened at the primary school level that traumatized them against writing and how they knew for a fact that they couldn't write well. So that's why I decided to take a look at what was happening at the primary school level and see how I can help. And so this entire series and the efforts that I've been doing so far have been a result of that. So I integrate activities like um what you call it, like scientific experiments, like games and very interactive sessions I use for the creative writing to really get students engaged with the writing. And my hope is that even if they don't believe that they can be, like Stephen King or J.K. Rowling or Charles Dickens, any of those, historically famous writers, at least they would appreciate the writing and be able to um, engage with the writing and do their best. So, writing is not going to be this tedious, drawn out, harassing thing that they initially feel it is. So, they will get the skills and they would be competent. That's the goal with the multisensory learning. And the whole purpose of multisensory learning is to show that writing is part of life, writing is interactive, and we can learn about writing through engaging and fun activities. And so, this entire series, what I will be talking to you about as I share the tips and information about reports and narratives, I would be giving you guidelines of some ideas that you could interact with and use with your child or your students. And comprehension is the other side of writing, that's the reading side. And we can engage with comprehension in interesting ways as well. Comprehension does not have to be distressing. And we're dealing with graphics. We're starting graphics this time around, which is, I suppose, the least distressing aspect of comprehension for most students. And we're going to talk about why that is. And when we get back around to fiction, nonfiction, and poetry, because remember, we're moving in a cycle, we'll talk a little bit more about how making those more interesting for the students can actually help them. So let's get started today. And as usual, what I want to do before I actually get into the session itself, the three different sessions, I wanted to share some things with you. This time around, I want to talk about what I'm working on. So I'm actually working on quite a few things. Some of them are finished. This one is the Creating Avatar series. That one, I'm actually working on a mind map for reports and narratives and a couple activities to help students recognize the difference between the two and to create a strategy for not mixing up the reports and narratives. Now, in theory, students don't mix them up. You ask them what's a report, they tell you. You ask them what is a narrative, they can tell you. But when it comes to the actual writing, you'd find that sometimes they have narrative elements in reports and sometimes report elements in narratives. So, for example, the other day I was speaking to a parent and she asked the question, can you have too many big words in a narrative because apparently the teacher had told the students to be careful of the big words in the narrative. And so I thought about it for a little bit, and yes, you can. Now, when we say big words, we mean the formal, sophisticated words, right? That's the understanding. And if you have a lot of those in a narrative, then imagine a reader having to stop and think what the word means each time they have to understand a scene. And you can imagine how that could hinder and be an issue for a narrative. So while you do want the sophisticated words, we have to be careful about the ones we use and the structure. And so that particular series is there to, I'm working on it. It's not quite complete yet because I'm adding some details to help with that. The three paragraph storytelling that started out as a worksheet and now it's pretty much a full blown textbook because I realize how needed it is. So I'll keep you guys posted on that. I am finishing up the foundation section, so I should be finished with that by the end of this month. That's the plan. The Mastering Comprehension 8 worksheets, that one is up and running. So if you want to get practice with comprehension during the break, you can have those. And somebody was asking for a question, like someone in SEA Peacefield Approach. Oh, which by the way, if you're not already a member of SEA Peacefield Approach, please join. Lots of awesome support in that community all around. Math, English, comprehension, the creative writing, everything. Ask your questions, even with selecting schools and everything. It's really an awesome community. So you should definitely join if you're not already a part of it. So someone had asked me in that group about a textbook that explains how to answer comprehension questions. So I am working on that, especially one for poetry. That's what I'm focusing on, but that's still in like kind of the beginning stages. But what I do when I give the answers for the worksheets, you get an explanation of how to create the answer. So while I don't have a textbook yet, the answers guide you to each of the questions. It explains most times what type of question the student is dealing with, how to approach answering the question, where to find answers to the question. So this is the next best thing. So you can get a copy. Now, it's not a complete ELA package, right? Two fiction passages, two non-fiction passages, two graphics, and two poems. That's what you get in this. And you can WhatsApp me to get a copy if you don't already have your copy, right? And then I'm also with the interactive games. I There are two up on the site now, I believe. We're getting into the hang of posting it, so this week we'd probably settle in a little bit better. Some more games are going up, so that if you want to get practice with, I think the one that's up on the home page now is formal and informal vocabulary. You get sentences and so on. The next one to go up, I think, is Hangman, dealing with some spelling. And so the games, and these are just go to the website, wordcoach.com, WERD. I'm going to put that up, WERDCOACH.com. And when you get to the page, you scroll down to the bottom of the page, right? That's the website, WERD. And just in case you're wondering, the E stands for elocution. So Word, WERD, is actually an acronym: writing, elocution, reading, and discourse. And that's all the aspects of communication. And so that's why we have Word Coach and so on. And so just go to the bottom of the page and you'd get the latest game. And if you've missed any of the games, there's a tab for you to click. If you click on that, it'll take you to the page with all the games that came previously. So right now we just have about, I think it's just two up, but this week we're putting up a couple others and we're getting into the groove. I think we're aiming for about three new unique games each week. So over the course of the vacation, you could have your students, your child interact with the games and, test out. The games are maybe 5 minutes, 10 minutes maximum. per game. I think most of them are about 5 minutes. And then the word study, that's more spelling and vocabulary. One is complete with answers. The other one, I'm still working on the answers. I mean, I have them, but I have to review them before I put it up on the website. So if you're interested in that, let me know. It's going to be up on the website this week. And then, of course, my vacation classes. I'm doing classes during August this time around so that we're doing comprehension, report writing, and narrative writing during August. WhatsApp me for more information, or you can check the website under courses. All right, so I thought I'd just update you on some of the things that I'm working on. And please, if you are interested in getting any particular worksheet done, like your child is struggling in an area and you want to get some information, whether it's reports, narratives, or comprehension, send me a message because chances are I have something that will help. If I don't, I'll add it to my list and it will be part of the things that I create. Because I want to spend July working on creating materials, as I said. And so if it is you're looking for something or you believe you need something that you're not able to find, let me know. Send me a WhatsApp and ask me, okay, this is my child's issue. What how can I deal with this? You can message me in SEA Peacefield. You can find me on Facebook and send me a direct message or WhatsApp. WhatsApp is the more direct one because of course that goes to my cell phone. All right, so that's just the introduction. Thank you for the time to allow me to do that. And so now we're getting into report writing transitions. And notice I didn't say transition words, I said transitions. And there's a reason for that. So let's get into it and first discuss what is the purpose of a transition. Understanding this is important because you want to know how to use the transitions and how to use them effectively. And so, in order to do that, we need to know what the purpose of a transition is. And so, let's take a look at the purpose. So, the purpose of a transition in a report is to create a smooth flow of ideas and ensure coherence between different sections or points. And so, if you're following the 5 paragraph report structure, there are different sections in the report. So, paragraph 1 will be the summary introduction. Paragraph 2 identifies what happened before, how things began. Paragraph 3 gets into the details of the main section of the report. Paragraph 4 gives immediate responses and what happened right after the thing happened. And then paragraph 5 would give you consequences and outcomes. So there are 5 distinct transition points in a report if you're using, excuse me, if you're using the 5 paragraph structure. So we have transitions between paragraphs, and we would also have transitions within paragraphs. So when you are giving points within a paragraph, you might use a transition to smoothen the idea and help readers kind of understand how the flow happened. And so, in doing that, we have different kinds of transitions that we could use. Now, in the grading rubric, if you don't have a copy, you can get a copy and I see a piece filled. That's the holistic rubric. Also, for reports, we did a review of that holistic rubric last week. So if you missed that session, you can go back and get that information about that holistic rubric. We did a kind of check in so that we know what we're doing and where we're heading. And in that, you would notice that there are transition words mentioned as well as transition phrases mentioned. And for the transition words, I gave 2 examples there, next and subsequently. Used individually, these are transition words because they're a single word and that's all it means. One word that is used as a transition. And then we have transition phrases, which is a group of words that is used as a transition. And so with the transition phrase, we have a more gradual movement, a gradual flow than with the transition word. And so when we're thinking of transitions in reports, we have to think of both transition words and transition phrases, not transition words only. And so students really do need to get into the understanding of there are two kinds of transitions in terms of words and phrases. And they would also need to understand that there are lots of different types of transitions. So we have the purpose of the transitions, and then we have these two kinds, I guess, and then we have transitions for different reasons. And so the transition phrase has a number of words, and it usually is at the beginning of a paragraph. That's the place that I think it works best. And we can also have it within a paragraph, sometimes even within a sentence, not just the beginning of a sentence only. So, what you want to do is to really make sure that students understand that there are transition words and transition phrases, what they look like, and have a list of a few that they can use. And because we have the basic content of the 5 sections of the report, then we can actually discuss and have a list. You can create a list for your child of transition words that could be in paragraph 2, transition words for paragraph 3, transition words for paragraph 4 or 5. And so those would be very useful. And I would say maybe like 3 to 4 words and 3 to 4 phrases that can be used at each juncture, and then you can have the child practice those. So we really want to recognize that we want words and phrases. Then we want to recognize as well, as I said, there are lots of different transition words and phrases, but not all of them are appropriate for the kind of report that students have to write for SEA. And so these are some of the ones that I see used often that I don't think are appropriate for reports. We can all understand suddenly why suddenly isn't appropriate. And it is, of course, because of the emotion and the feeling impact suddenly has. So we recognize that immediately. But as a result, and furthermore, are also transition words that are not the best for the reports that students have to write. And the reason is that as a result shows the result of something. And it connects the idea with the action and the result and says that this action is responsible for this result. Now, once you get into that kind of judgment, you're getting into opinion. It's a very subtle opinion, but when you use as a result, what you are really saying is that um, this situation is responsible for this other situation. And while it might seem obvious, remember, we are reporting, we're supposed to be reporting what we see and not our judgment. And what we would actually see is this thing happened and then this thing happened, right? And so, what we might need to do is just really be mindful of what the issues are and what the transition actually means, so that just a second, I'm getting distracted. Just got a pop up. All right. So, yeah, so we want to really think about what does the transition mean? How does it function? And then that's what we would think about in terms of is it appropriate for a report or not. Furthermore, really deals with the, I guess, it is also a kind of judgment, and it is more or less used for persuasion when you are adding a point for emphasis. And remember, in a report, because we're giving facts and details, we don't necessarily want to be emphasizing anything in particular because that shows our focus and shows a little bit of bias. And that's the reason, furthermore, is not appropriate for a report. It's a very subtle thing, but it does indeed give that sort of very subtle um, opinion, sort of bias kind of thing happening. And that is why we really want to stay clear of those. So think about it. There are lots of others, and we can have a fairly long list of transitions, but how you would know which ones are appropriate and which ones are not, what you would need to do is to think about how the transition functions, what it actually means in the paragraph, and that would give you an idea. Is it adding emotion? Is it adding emphasis? Is it adding, let's say, like an opinion or a judgment? If yes, avoid those. What you want to do is to focus on transitions that deal with sequence, deal with time. You can deal with additions as well, but those are the ones that would keep you strictly focused on structure and formality and avoiding all the other really subtle nuances of the other types of transitions. So this week, you're following along with the lives, and you know that at the end of each segment, I give you a few ideas about what you can do to cover what we discussed with your child or students for the week. And so for this week, introductions to transitions, the key thing is to make sure students understand what a transition is, how it functions in a report, the two different types generally, transition words and transition phrases, and you want to also make sure that they can recognize how transitions work, what the transition words and phrases mean. And so we have roughly three 30-minute sessions because we're not writing full reports yet. So we don't necessarily need that 1 hour session at the third juncture. So you want to set aside 3 sessions. You're not doing all at once. You're doing it more than once during the week. And so first session, what are transitions, how they're used? You might want to get a few copies of reports that use transitions well, have the students read it, recognize it, understand what they are, the different types, words, and phrases. Then, second session, you want to look at some transitions that should be avoided, go through a list of appropriate transitions that can be used. And then the third session, what you're doing is having the child practice. So give a prompt. We're only writing 1 paragraph, perhaps, and have them, or you could even do sentences, just to gradually get into using transitions in the reports. And of course, this is not the first and only time they would look at transitions in reports. So next week, we're continuing with transitions as well. So we're just gradually introducing it, making sure they understand what they are doing and why. And that's the focus for report writing this week. Right. So now we could move on to the character descriptions for narrative writing. Now, last week, when we started looking at characters in narratives and we looked at character descriptions, we discussed that characters have different dimensions and different aspects to them in every story. So we have the character's personality, we have the character's behavior, and we have the character's emotions. Then we have the physical descriptions. So we have all these different aspects of the characters. Now, the thing is that the character's behavior can show personality. The character's behavior um, also would show what the character is doing, their actions. And then we discussed about emotions. That's something that students need to be able to add characters' reactions to things. And we looked a little bit more closely at the character physical descriptions. And the reason I'm sort of zeroing on this one, aside from the fact that, yeah, I have to raise my hand. I do have a problem with character physical descriptions. I tend to focus on the character's actions and emotions. And sometimes when I write stories, I forget the physical descriptions. So when I did the samples, I wrote the samples and then I went back and went through it and said, okay, where can I put in a physical description? Because I do tend to neglect the physical description. And I can tell you one of the reasons for that is that as writers, we're thinking about what's going on, we're thinking about the action. And especially if students are told, oh, you have to include conflict and you have to have it exciting, and that's what their focus is. And then they tend to forget that, you know, the characters actually have physical dimensions to them, and readers might need to know a little bit about that in order for the readers to have an idea of what the character looks like. And so it's not at the top of the list. So it's definitely something students need to practice. I can tell you for a fact that out of 10, if I review 10 stories, I can tell you out of that 10, at least half of them will forget both physical descriptions and emotions. Students tend to focus on the actions. And out of the five that remember, they usually remember one or the other. Very seldom do I get a student who is now learning and practicing about reports, about stories. Very seldom do I get a student who remembers both. So that's why we're really kind of focusing on this one. We'll talk more about characters, emotions, in ensuing sessions. So physical descriptions, what do we need to remember? One, we need to spread them throughout the story. Sometimes I get a description in the introduction, but nothing else in the rest of the story. Sometimes I get it perhaps in the middle of the story, like the body paragraphs, but nowhere else. The idea is that you want to spread the character physical descriptions throughout the story. Now, again, remember I said it's something that I'm also working on. You want to really look at least one in the introduction, at least one in in each of the body paragraphs, and if you can, one in the conclusion. So the idea is that instead of giving like a description dump, like, describing the whole character, taking like two, three sentences to describe the character right away, you want to have the interactions um of the character as opportunities to add in descriptions. So as the character interacts throughout the story, you want to use that opportunity to share a few details about the character as you continue. And so um let's say the character is walking. You want to use the walking as an opportunity to talk about maybe their legs or their body or their shoes. If the character is opening a door, maybe you can use that to talk about their hands or how they are feeling, or something that would lead you toward wherever the attention of the audience is. Use that opportunity to introduce a character description. And so the idea with using actions to direct focus, think about what would readers be paying attention to in this action, and then enhance the experience by adding in that physical description. And then you also want to include descriptions that add to the image of the character. Students have a tendency to talk about, my skinny fingers or my chubby fingers and, these kinds of things. Sometimes it sounds, derogatory and self-deprecating, and we do need to be careful about that, how we make the characters seem with descriptions. Because believe it or not, I mean, in real life, we say, okay, don't judge a book by its cover. But why do we have that saying? Because that's what we do. And we make snap judgments about people based on what they wear, how they behave, and all these kinds of things. And so it's the same thing readers are going to do. Readers are going to make judgments about a character based on their descriptions. So we want to use the descriptions to enhance whatever idea of the character that the writer wants to convey. So if you're dealing with a scary character, dress them in a way that seems foreboding. If you're dealing with a fun loving, carefree character, maybe have their hair represent some of that carefree way, like wild, wispy hair, or perhaps a different color, or, something that enhances the character's personality and allows readers to make that judgment about the character. So we want to use that wisely. And then finally, we want to make the descriptions relevant. So while we're using the action to direct focus, we want to make that description relevant as well. So where I'll give you an example. I did actually did an example. Um, let's say student is in class and the teacher is walking to the class. I remember at university, we had this lecturer who we would hear her shoes coming down the corridor. We knew when she was heading to class, and we knew it was her because of the way the footsteps were. She had this really quick kind of click, 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 click kind of. That's why I put the click clack because that's what I remembered when I wrote this example. Um, and we could even add the rapid click clack. So we have some movement description there as well. So the rapid click clack of Mrs. Johnson's shiny black heels echoed down the corridor. How do we know they're shiny? Well, Mrs. Johnson wears the same shiny black heels every day. That's her go-to shoes. We can create a whole story around that. But the idea is that shiny black heels, that is the character description. This is an example of describing attire. We're dealing with the footwear, but we're making it relevant to the story and we're incorporating it with the action. And so this is the kind of thing that students need to practice, getting into the habit of focusing their descriptions with actions and making it relevant to the story. So we learned something about Mrs. Johnson. She's wearing shiny black heels. We can call them pumps, but I don't know how many people will know what a pump is and what it looks like. Um, so we know heels, right? And that's the thing with vocabulary, with fiction, with writing stories. You want to make it kind of relevant to what's happening and the reader. So the reader will understand and be able to form that image in their minds. We don't want to make it too fanciful that the reader has to run to a dictionary to figure out the word and then understand what the story is about. We want them to get it fairly easily. So, yes, use some words here and there that are higher level, but just be mindful how they are used and how often they are used. So, I hope you get the point with the physical descriptions in terms of using the character description and using the interaction with the setting. So, in this case, she's just walking but her shoes are making a sound that's impacting on the story. Um, and then because her shoes are making a sound that's impacting on the story, then we get an opportunity to describe the shoes. Because when I say the click clack of Mrs. Johnson, coming down the corridor, I don't think she's walking down the corridor going click clack, right? She's, readers would think, okay, it's her footsteps. And since we have the footsteps, let's describe the shoes. And so this is what I mean by directing the reader's attention with actions. So wherever the actions are directing focus, take that opportunity to describe the character's physical being with whatever area the focus is on. And after this, we could move on to something else. We don't necessarily need to continue with our character description of Mrs. Johnson unless it's relevant. So maybe we could say, okay, the click clack, she's coming down the corridor, rapid click clack. Then when she enters the classroom, maybe she kind of scowls at everybody and squints her eyes behind her, her red B framed glasses. So then we get the to add the glasses descriptions because you could just imagine that somebody who's walking click click clack clack coming down the corridor would be wearing glasses, right? Just it's just me, or we all kind of imagine Mrs. Johnson with glasses too. All right, so probably just me, but this is how you can include character description. We could also talk about her coming in with a stack of papers. Maybe she's coming with an exam and how she's gripping it tightly, with her long red fingernails kind of thing. So okay, so yeah, we're not painting a really nice picture of Mrs. Johnson, but Mrs. Johnson could be really nice as well. So as she, click clack and she comes into class and she has this broad smile and her corsage. Maybe she always wears these fanciful artificial flower corsages or a brooch or something that every day she has a different brooch and it's also so fancy. I had a colleague who was like that. I don't know where she would get these brooches. She always had these really gorgeous bejeweled brooches, and every day was a different one, kind of thing. I guess that was her thing. But so we could use the character description to add in some information about personality to each of the characters. And another thing to note with character descriptions is that you don't always have to describe the main character. You can describe the another character like Mrs. Johnson. She's probably not the main character, but she's important because the main character is sitting in class, hearing her click clack and maybe getting some anxiety or a panic attack or something because of this exam that's coming. And so she's interacting with the main character in that way. So she's important to the story, but she's not the main character. Which reminds me, let me take a little pause here to talk about characters. I did mention it before when we spoke about characters in stories. We spoke about the different kinds of characters and so on. But I was having a conversation. I spent this weekend, yesterday and Sunday and Friday, I think. Well, the past few days, wrapping up with my students so that I could do their end of term reports. I'm sending them out this week so that parents would know what to work on during the break. So I meet with students individually. So after we do all the group classes, I meet with students individually. And in the individual sessions. I do this because even though my classes are small, there are some students they answer wonderfully during class, but then when I check their writing, I don't see the translation of what it is we're discussing in class. They do the sentences well, they do the feedback well. Then when it's time to write a story, I read the story and I think, huh, what did I miss? Was this child in the same class that everybody else was in? And so I always meet with students individually so that I can clarify certain things. And in one of my discussions, a student was writing about a day the toy came to life. So I always ask students to send me what they did at school so that I could see that they're also translating what we do in class to school as well in their schoolwork. Because I've also found that because my classes are different and very interactive, students they respond well in my class, but when they go to school and they meet Miss or meet Sir, then they kind of just revert to what they're accustomed doing at school. So we always have to find strategies to make them translate it. So I'm meeting with a student. He's writing about the day his stuffed toy came to life. And he said that the stuffed toy was the main character. So I asked him why. And he said that because he's describing the stuffed toy, and the stuffed toy is what he wrote about the most. So I asked him, I said, well, okay, did you write the story from the stuffed toy's perspective? Like looking through the stuffed toy's eyes, what the stuffed toy experienced, how the toy reacted to that experience. And he thought for a bit and he said, no, not really. But I wrote about the stuffed toy the most, so that's why the stuffed toy is the main character. So then I asked him, okay, so whose perspective did you write from? He said, well, my perspective, because I own the stuffed toy and I took it to school. It was an activity. And I said, okay, so whose feelings did you describe in the story? He said, well, my feelings because the stuffed toy came to life and how I reacted to it. And I said, aha. So that is how you know who the main character is. When looking for the main character is not only the person who you are writing about, because you can have other characters in the story. You can actually have a villain. And in this case, we discussed a story where the stuffed toy turned into a villain and did some mischief and different things. So they are important characters to the story as well. And so you would write about them quite a lot. But the issue is, whose perspective are you writing from? Whose emotional reactions are you following? And so when we come to characters and character descriptions, we can describe multiple characters in a story, not always the main character. And so readers really need to, well, writers, students need to understand um, the difference between the characters and who is the main character and what kind of focus they need to give the main character. So I just thought I would add that in because while we're talking on characters, yes, we're talking character physical description. We do need at least one or two physical descriptions of the main character. But the main character isn't the only character we would want to describe, especially if you have a character versus character situation where the conflict is a villain or another character, then you want to have some descriptions of that other character as well. And in this case, like the issue with Mrs. Johnson, Mrs. Johnson probably isn't necessarily the villain, but she plays a role in the story by impacting the main character, affecting how the main character feels. And so thinking about characters, we need to kind of pay attention to those kinds of things. So, what are you doing this week in terms of reviewing the narratives? So, you want to start with identifying who the main character is, looking at how many characters you have in the story, and which ones you need to describe and which ones you could avoid describing. Because remember, every time you pause to give a description, even when you're doing description in action, like this one here, the example on screen, you're kind of shifting the reader's attention from the actual description of the character to from the action to the description of the character. So let me repeat that. When we add in character descriptions, we're temporarily shifting the reader's attention from the action and the plot toward what the character looks like. And that temporary shift breaks our momentum of the plot. Even when we have description and action like this, it's minor, it's far less this way when we have the action, but it's still a minor break. And so that's why you don't want to have too many descriptions back to back. You want to spread it out. So start with reading some stories, identifying character descriptions, the way the descriptions are introduced into the stories, how they are spread out, what we learn about characters from their descriptions, how the descriptions impact the story itself. And that's what you're aiming for. Maybe the first two sessions might be on this because I think you need to come back to it a couple of times. Then you also want to introduce this description in action so that have students and have your child practice writing descriptions that include some action as well. So, what is the character doing? They're walking. Okay, what can we describe about them as they're walking? We can describe their clothes, we can describe their bodies, because they might be like heavy set and their steps make, you know, very huge thumping sounds. If you have like a monster you're describing or something, you're going to have these huge thumping sounds because of the monster, thrashing through wherever it's going and so on. So think about what you want to describe about the character and what action you could use. Or if you have the action, what does that allow you to describe? And so that's the practice for this week, really getting into a deeper understanding of character descriptions by reading stories and identifying character descriptions, understanding how these descriptions impact the stories, understanding the description in action, and giving that a little bit of a practice. And later on, we will talk about putting it all together, but we really want students to be able to understand these things before we ask them to produce it in a story. So that's what we're doing for this week with the narratives. And so we're finished with that. So we completed the report section, we've completed the narrative section, and now we're into graphics. And um, I would say why graphics are easier until they're not, because I have students tell me, oh, Miss, graphics are easy, I get more marks in graphics, but they're still losing about 2 to 3 marks in each graphic. And when you have a graphic that's worth 8 marks, because that's how the exam is, and most of the practice tests will be that way, you would have 4 questions for the graphics, 2 marks each question. Graphics are easier, but then students might take things for granted, and then you'd find them losing marks in graphics when this is where they need to make up their marks because of the other types of challenges that you might get for the reports, for the fiction, nonfiction, and poems. Right? So graphics are where you really should be picking up marks, not losing any at all, so you can get your full marks at the graphics to really support and bolster the comprehension marks. Graphics have a bit less interpretation than the other two forms of comprehension, the passage and the poem. And so graphics are a little bit more straightforward. And as a result of that, you want to, as I said, make sure students fully understand it to make sure they get the maximum amount of marks here. So that's why I said why it's easier until it's not, because it seems easier, but then we have the issue of marks still being lost. So let's look at graphics. Now, there are lots of different types of graphics. Not all are going to be the same. I noticed that the SCA past papers tend to work with things like flyers and advertisements. In 2019 was a flowchart. Um, I have seen in the exemplars, I think there's a label, and so there are a few different kinds. And so you can look at each different kind. In fact, in my comprehension program, I have a list of, I think, 12 of them. Not all of them would show up, but we look at what are some of the unique aspects of each of these so that students will not feel intimidated by, what is this am I looking at, right? But when it comes down to it, regardless of what type of graphic it is, when it comes down to it, the whole idea is that graphics are visual. And this is the reason why it's so much easier for most students, because it's based on images. And students who struggle with comprehension quite often struggle with interpreting the language and how words work together. And so, because the graphics really focus on visual elements, it feels a lot easier. There are far fewer words on a graphic than you would get in a text and even a poem. And so, students who believe that comprehension is a little bit intimidating, they are less intimidated by graphics, and therefore they're more likely to complete the graphics section. However, students do need to understand the different aspects of a graphic and what aspects would need to be focused on. And so, the number one thing that I recommend students pay attention to with the graphic is to think of the purpose, because every element in a graphic is there for a purpose, and that purpose always has to do with the audience. Now, the difference with graphics that many students tend not to recognize is that quite a lot of the graphics that they will encounter are persuasive in nature. Fiction stories are meant to entertain, tell us about characters and setting and so on. Nonfiction is meant to inform us about different things, maybe get us thinking more critically. Poems are meant to move us emotionally and intellectually and have us really thinking deeply about different topics. What is the purpose of a graphic? In the majority of cases, there is an element of sharing information, but there's also an element of persuasion. Why do we need images to get the reader's attention? Why do we have certain texts in big print, bold or circled or underlined, or in the exams and in the past papers we won't get them in different colors, but in real life we get graphics in different colors as well. And so, what was the issue with those? Um, it's to give readers, have an impact on the readers. Let me put it that way. So we have to think about the different elements of the graphic. Everything is primarily visual, but there are different elements of a graphic. So, and in each of the different kinds, so like we have these lots of different kinds, we have different uses for the visual elements. So, for example, an index, sometimes you would have an index with a graphic. It might be with an image. It might be an image that was used to just, direct focus. Is an image that may have been used in the text itself. Table of contents might also have images. Excuse me, might also have images. I've seen practice tests with book covers, and students have to interpret, different aspects of the book covers. But if you really study the past papers, you're not likely to see in the past 6 years um, any book covers or indexes or any of those uh, types of graphics. However, learning the elements and learning what the elements are used for makes a difference, because next week we'd be looking at graphics questions, and you would see that there are certain unique graphic questions that you wouldn't get in a passage or a poem, simply because of the fact that graphics are very visual, right? And so what the agenda is this week with graphics is to take a look at all the different kinds of graphics, look at what the different elements of the graphics are, and think about the purpose. So you're thinking about the purpose of the graphic in general, because you can get a question like, who is this supposed to appeal to? Now, in understanding who the audience is, you'd need to know the purpose and whatnot. And then there would be elements in the graphic that would help you understand that. And so spend some time on that this week. So while, yes, graphics are more accessible in terms of the information, students really do still need to recognize the different elements of graphics, how they work, how they fulfill the purpose of the graphic, and discuss things like audience and why do you think this audience versus that audience? What is the purpose really? And you want to look at that during the week. So get a couple of graphics, and you could work with the past papers if you don't have any other options for graphics. Practice tests if you have those. Look at the different kinds of graphics. Look at the elements that they have in common. Most of them would have images, some words. The words might be different sizes and so on. We might have contact information depending on the type of the graphic. So just go through and see, okay, what does this graphic have in it? What information is being shared with readers through these details? And so going through like that, students would begin to understand graphics a little bit more, and then they would be able to answer the questions more effectively. And like I said, clean up all the marks as possible with the graphics. We don't want students losing any marks with the graphics because it's the most accessible part of the comprehension. And so we want them to ace that section. It's easier to ace that section once they understand the elements of the graphic and so on. So that's your agenda this week. So the first session, take a look at a few graphics, all the different types, maybe recognize that there are different types, but then start looking at, okay, what do they have in common? Images, text used differently, no complete sentences, no paragraphs, those kinds of things. Look at what's unique about a graphic. Then you want to look at, okay, these unique elements of a graphic, how do they communicate information? How do I understand the purpose of the graphic from that? And then finally, you want to look at maybe discussion of audience. How do you identify audience and who would be best suited? Who's the target audience? What does the creator of the graphic want the audience to do at the end of all of this? What's the whole purpose of the graphic? Again, different aspect of purpose, but worth getting into. All right, so that's your agenda this week. I know it's kind of like technically vacation, and I say technically in quotations because I know many students are doing continuing studies at school, some are continuing lessons and so on for the July August period. Do remember to take a break, yes, but try to maximize the impact of what's being done. And so, since it's not like a strict classroom setting, try to interact, with the materials. So, like for example, graphics. Go through the newspapers, cut out some flyers, cut out some ads. So students can actually see that this is not just for the SEA exam. This is a way for them to interpret and understand what is happening in the world of advertising and marketing and be prepared for dealing with and navigating some of these things. So make sure they understand all the different aspects and elements of the graphic and everything else. So in this session, we looked at report transitions, physical descriptions, and reading graphics. And how you can, so you have a sort of plan what you're tackling for the week. And of course, my comprehension package is available. It's just $50 for the 8 worksheets. And the real value in the package is the explanation and the answers, where I go into detail about, okay, this is this kind of question. If you're answering this kind of question, here are some of the things that you can try, because that's really what students need, how to answer the questions effectively. And of course, with the reports and narratives, I have the 7 stories and the 5 reports. This month, I'm going to be revising those, updating, upgrading, adding in some details. And so in August, there would be a lot more materials to work with. And of course, we have the games. Don't forget the games, wordcoach.com. Go to the website. We're trying to put up at least 3 every week. If we get more done than that, then you can check in as well. So keep checking in like every couple of days or so to see, what games are uploaded. All right, so that's it. That's my hour. Trying to keep within. I'm still over the hour. See if I can get it done within a minute, right? Um, Thank you for those of you who are able to stay for the entire length of the live. And as always, the lives are recorded, so you can go back to YouTube or my website. And I figured out how to share it in Peaceful, so I'm going to go check see if it was shared properly, so that I can, get back into making sure everything is in that community as well. So be sure to WhatsApp me if you have any questions. You can send me messages on Messenger as well. If you want to get a particular kind of material for reports, narratives, or comprehension that you have not been seeing or been able to access, if I don't already have something, I'd get set about with creating something for you. Okay, because of course, if you need it, it means other people will benefit from it as well. And that's the whole agenda. My July is primarily going to be spent creating materials. So thank you again. Have a wonderful rest of the day today. And I'm going to be here next week again. We're continuing with transitions, descriptions, and graphics. So check back 11 o'clock, 11 o'clock ish, depending on, if the technology decides to love me or not. All right. Take care, everybody. Have a wonderful day. Bye bye.